You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Once again, my name is Ryan Hopkins, or JR, and thanks for coming to the show this week and listening. I first want to start by saying just thanks to folks who have written in with questions or kind words and been supportive of the show and the Hiking Radio Network in general as we've been trying some different things. And I really appreciate the encouragement folks have been sending my way as we've been doing some guest hosting with myself, and then Steve still doing some and trying some different options. So I really appreciate that. You know, going along with that, this week's show is no exception of trying something a little different. I've kind of had this thought in the back of my mind for a while of, I can't think of the right term. What keeps coming to the surface is subject matter experts, but people that have a very specific area of experience or background that is applicable to backpacking and long distance hiking and the Appalachian Trail and other trails and things like that. So that was what led to the show this week. I'll do a little bit of intro in the interview itself, but we wanted to try it out, and the subject around electronics, technology, electronics on the trail and hiking has kind of come up a lot adjacently to some other interviews, and people have had some questions about it, and that's what helped me decide to go in this direction for this first kind of subject discussion. If it's something that you're already very familiar with and you don't have a lot of questions about, then that's totally fine too. You know, you may learn something new from this, or some of it may be a reminder to you. If you have a lot of questions about electronics and things on the trail, this hopefully will be a very useful show for you, and you'll be able to gain something from it. Of course, throughout the interview, I believe I'll mention that, you know, if you have any questions for our guest today or myself, always feel free to reach out. My email is in the show notes. And if you have any thoughts about specific areas of curiosity or specific topics that you are interested in, please reach out with those as well. All right, so we will get into the interview now. And in that interview, I'll have a little bit more intro about today's topic, and we'll go from there. All right, we are on with Will Campbell, or trail name Guano Man, which I think is one of my personal favorites. So honestly, before we go any further, can you share with us how that trail name came to be?
Yeah, of course. I think you were there. So we were hiking last summer sometime in Grayson Highlands in Virginia, and we were hot, tired. I think every 10 feet there's a pile of horse dung, which has nothing to do with guano. That's bird
or
droppings,
ponies, or cows, just all sorts of wildlife.
A lot of wildlife, a lot of smells coming from both the livestock and myself. And yeah, it was a great day.
Just made sense.
Just was inspired. The privies. It was just it all just kind of came together, and then hearing the birds chirping, I was like, you know what, Guano Man. I think that's me. That's got to be me from now on.
It's stuck. It's stuck. I love that. Well, I think it's a great reminder that trail names are wide and varied and can be very unique. So anyway, that is the story for that. I'm glad we got that out of the way at the top of the show. So today's interview is going to be a little bit different. So obviously, Will has done some backpacking in the past, but I wanted to chat with him today as kind of like a subject matter expert on a topic that is kind of adjacent to hiking, but still part of the hiking world and long distance backpacking world, which was electronics, technology, cellular systems, everything that goes into electronics on the trail. We've gotten a lot of questions in recent weeks and months, just on the Hiking Radio Network in general, about electronics, people being curious about different options. It just keeps coming up. And I was like, you know what? We should just do a show about it. and see where it goes and see how people like it. What kind of tipped the scale is, I think it was the interview a few weeks ago with Zach Hoops. And if you listen to the interview, you'll know that he's very good at making guides and maps and weather and everything. And he said to me after the interview, he said, I can find all this information and I can get this squared away so easily. But when it comes to electronics and good information on electronics, it's hard. It's really hard. And so that's what kind of inspired this show. So anyway, that's enough of me introing this. Will, would you like to share more about your background and why I've kind of reached out to you as a subject matter expert in electronics?
Yeah, sure. So I appreciate the expert tag. I won't claim to be an expert, but I am formally trained, I guess you could say. So I went to North Carolina State University from 2013. I graduated in 2017. So my bachelor's degree is in electrical engineering. So dealt with toys and batteries and stuff like this for quite some time. I did leave electrical engineering and actually am a pilot full time now, but I still do circuit projects on the side and still keep up with it. And a lot of my friends are also electrical engineers, so pretty familiar with it. It's one of those things that it's not so hard once you dig into a little bit. There's a lot of words, a lot of terms, stuff that just there's plenty of metaphors and analogies that we can really boil this down and make it a lot easier to understand.
Yeah, and I've asked you plenty of questions about electronics, and I think you've even fixed some of my broken things, whether it be lights or headlights or whatever.
Yeah,
so,
you had you had an Eno pack as a light pack, LED pack for one of your hammock setups from a long time ago. Yeah, I put a potentiometer in it so you could dim it, which was kind of a silly project, but yeah,
but it works.
It's always fun. Yeah, there you go. It works.
And we're not here to sell any services today. There's no referral
no services.
codes
No,
for any.
This is not sponsored.
Perfect. So, with that being said, I guess to start off with, we have a couple different topics that we want to get to in regards to electronics. But if we could start with the basics, this is something that I even stumble over sometimes. If you could just kind of go through some of the language that's used a lot, whether it's with chargers or solar or cell phones, about, volts, watts, amps, all those terms that we hear so often. And if you have any like metaphors or quick ways to remember the differences in those terms.
Yeah, absolutely. So best place to start is just like you said, volts, amps, and watts. This is kind of the fundamentals of anything electronic. So voltage, if you want a scientific definition, is also referred to as the electric potential difference. It's got a bunch of names: electric potential difference, voltage. You may have heard electromotive force, electric pressure, or electric tension. So shout out to Wikipedia for the exhaustive list there. But essentially all it is the pressure from an electrical circuit's power source. So maybe it's a battery, or if you've got a solar cell, that would be your power source that pushes electrons through a conducting loop, through a circuit. So voltage is it's the pressure, it's the amount of, the force that's pushing the electrons around. So the best analogy people use is water. They compare electrons with water all the time. Now, obviously that breaks down a little bit when you get a little bit deeper into it, but at a surface level, you can think of voltage as water pressure. So the higher the voltage, the more work that can be done with the electrons. So think about a water coming through a pipe. So the more pressure you got coming through that pipe, maybe the water is coming through the pipe and it's going to go in and turn like a water wheel or something like that. So the more pressure you have, that wheel's going to turn faster, doing more work. So it's kind of the work you can accomplish. So that's voltage, pressure. That's kind of bottom line, voltage or pressure. Now on the flip side, we got amps. So amps is short for amperes, and basically it's the amount of charge passing through any point in a circuit per unit time. So when they say per unit time, they'll say basically we have this unit called I'm trying to get too scientific here, but have this unit called a coulomb, which is a number. It's a number of electrons. It doesn't matter what that number is. So it's 1 coulomb per second is 1 ampere. So an ampere, basically, you can think in the water analogy, an amps is your flow rate through a pipe. So, if you've got a large pipe or a small pipe, doesn't matter, however fast the water is coming through it based on the voltage or the water pressure, That's what your flow rate is going to be. So amps is just voltage, again, is the pressure, the water pressure, and amps is, the flow rate, how much water is coming through any section of that circuit or pipe per unit time.
I think I'm following.
Go ahead.
I'm following.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So now we're going to wrap it all up in a nice bow here with watts. This is where watts is kind of where, all these electronic stuff, watts and milliamp hours, which we'll talk about in a minute, are kind of the two big points. So a lot of people have heard of watts. Wattage is how your, kilowatt hours is how you're charged electric bills at home, things like that. Where you'll see wattage on your chargers or different devices. So the water analogy breaks down a little bit here, but essentially, kind of in layman's terms, watts is just your voltage multiplied by your amps. So it's how much force multiplied by how fast that force is going. You can kind of compare it to the water thing is total water flow. So imagine you have a smaller pipe with a high pressure or a larger pipe with a lower pressure, and they still pass the same amount of water, so you still get the same wattage. So let's say you had 5 volts at 3 amps, 15 watts. Okay, what if you have 3 volts at 5 amps? Still 15 watts. That's the instantaneous wattage you're getting there. And of course, it gets much more complicated and deeper than that than I even can remember or care to go into. But that's the basic kind of surface level definitions of the big three: voltage, amps, and watts.
Great. Well, that's a great starting point with this common language, because as we go through some of these different components, I know those terms will be used. So as you know, kind of in the backpacking world, the battery banks are kind of the go-to for any type of electrical needs in the backcountry. So when we're thinking about all the different varieties of battery banks, and Amazon.com would love to sell you all sorts of different ones. How, there's always numbers and there's always different terms used for those. I mean, how would you go about explaining the differences in those batteries and what you should look for? Yeah,
so it comes down, a couple things. So what's your mission? Are you through hiking? Are you going out for a day hike? You going to overnight? So it's going to boil a lot down to weight and how much capacity you have to afford that you want to carry around. But just getting into some of the numbers. So the biggest number, in my opinion, that matters for I'll say 2 numbers that matter for power banks, like I said a little bit ago. First of all, is going to be your output wattage. So we talked about, watts is the product of your volts and your amps. So in general, the higher your wattage, the faster you're going to see your phone or whatever other device charge. So for instance, if you have an iPhone, so an iPhone charger, the little cube charger that comes out of the box, that is a 5-watt charger. Now, on the flip side, if you have an iPad, that bigger charger, that is a 12-watt, I believe. Either 12 or 18. Either way, same concept. If you use that...
Sorry to interrupt. These are like the typical USB out, like comes with an iPhone. Because I think the newest iPhone comes with the USB-C ones, but we're talking about the ones from
we're still talking
a year
about,
or 2 years ago.
Yeah, I'm a little behind. I'm still rocking it's not an iPhone 8, it's the iPhone SE, but I'm a little bit behind the curve on that. But
the standard square USB though is what we're talking about. Okay.
Yep, that's the one. So if you charge your phone with the little, square block, I've actually got one sitting on my desk right here. If you plug that in and charge your phone with that, of course it's going to charge. But if you want to charge it faster, if you actually use that iPad charger, it's going to charge a lot quicker because you're pushing more current through and it has more force to do so. So your output wattage is a big consideration with these power banks. So a lot of them offer different wattage levels. I know Anker is one of the brands that is pretty popular. They have all sorts of different options. There's an article that you shared with me that I looked at. It's on Guthook Guides that the guy who wrote the article did a benchmark with a 30-watt charger, an 18-watt charger, a 12, and a 5-watt charger. And what he did essentially was he ran the same benchmark. He wanted to charge, he used an iPhone 8. He drained it down to, he says 21% here. And then what he did was just, plug it in with the different chargers. And what he found was that, hands down, the 5-watt took the longest by several hours. But what was interesting and important to note is 12-watt, 18-watt, and 30-watt really didn't have that much of a significant difference. So 12 watt ends up being kind of the sweet spot, at least in his opinion. I would agree with that. 12 watt or 18 watt. Like I have an Anchor pack that has an 18 and a 12 outlet. I'll just kind of switch back and forth between those depending on what I'm doing. So that's kind of the wattage side of the house. The other thing is the milliamp hours. So milliamp hours is one of those confusing numbers. People are always like, why is it not milliamps per hour? Like, why is it milliamp? What does that mean? So any amp hours, milliamp hours, however you want to call it, is how many. So if it's let's say it's 20,000 milliamp hours. I'm looking at a web page right here for an Anchor. It's called a Power Core Essential 20,000. This is an example. So basically for 1 hour, you can pull 20,000 milliamps. Or 20 amps actually is kind of how 20,000 milliamps is 20 amps. It's not going to let you do that. There is an output limit. I think this one's limited to 3 amps. But we're just talking theoretically what the number actually means. So a milliamp hour means how many milliamps you can get in an hour. So in a half hour, you could double that number. So if you have a 20,000 milliamp hour device, in a half an hour, theoretically, you could pull 40,000 milliamps. Or for 15 minutes, which a quarter of an hour, you could pull 80,000. So that's kind of where those numbers come from, if that makes sense. Okay. You're basically, it's how much you can pull in an hour or in a time slot.
That's helpful. I'm trying to think of some more examples that I hear a lot in kind of the hiking world. You know, when you were mentioning that Gut Hook article, and I'll put that in the show notes, you were talking about the specific like wall chargers, but that also applies to the battery banks as far as the wattage out. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah, I was kind of bouncing back. Okay. I wasn't being very clear there, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's regardless of how you get it, whether you get it from a wall plug, which is basically a transformer coming off 120 volt, or if it's a lithium-ion battery pack that you got from Anchor. Your output wattage is wattage. So however you're getting that wattage, the facts remain that's going to be, your time and charging is going to be less with the higher wattage to a point that you can get.
So that's something for folks to be mindful of, right? Like not only the charging speed of the power bank, but also the speed that it's going to charge their devices. So I think that even Anchor has some different variants. I think they use the words, I think they use quick charging. They have some that are trickle charging. And I'm assuming those are all just types of characteristics of different types of wattage out from their battery banks to your devises.
I would imagine. Right? I don't know the kind of the fundamental electrical engineering of how they do the quick charge. It is physically has to be some function of wattage, but trickle charge. So if you can kind of think of wattage again is, maybe you're filling a jar up with water. So you can only fill it but so fast, right? So you can either put a little tiny, drop by drop, so a trickle into the jar. It's going to fill up eventually. It's going to take quite some time. But you can't take a pressure washer and just shoot that at the jar and expect it to fill up because it's going to happen. And some's going to get in there, but a lot of it's going to blast back out, or it's just as you're trying to fill it, it's going to that analogy is not 100% accurate, but you can kind of get
I see what you mean though. Yeah.
You can only shove, but so electronics and, with electronic cars and all this stuff, this is the big problem with batteries is you can only get but so many electrons in there at a time, but so fast. That's a hard engineering challenge that they're constantly working on. And really, batteries is more specifically a chemical engineer's job. Electrical engineers kind of use batteries as their voltage source, but the actual science behind batteries, that would be a chemical engineer, because all of that lead acid or lithium ion, all that stuff, that's their wheelhouse, and that's stuff they work on a day-to-day basis.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to think of some more examples here, like I was kind of alluding to. Mm-hmm. So, this is something we hear from hikers quite a bit is, they buy this battery bank and they don't, it's like, oh, it's a big number. That's great, right? The bigger the milliamps, the better, or whatever. And they go to charge it, like they get into town, or like I said, whether they're through hiking or section hiking, they get to a hostel, they get into town, wherever, they plug it into the wall with just whatever plug they may have. So let's in this example say is it the 5 watt?
Yeah, 5 watt. Yep.
Standard, like old school, I guess old school now, iPhone square. And they plug in that charger, and they plug in the battery bank to that charger, and they go to bed. And they wake up the next morning, and that battery bank may only be halfway fully charged. And so they've been there for 12 hours. And so it's kind of like, well, what's the deal, right? Like this charged all night and now I'm just carrying this brick around, this extra weight that's not even fully charged. So I hear that a lot. And so what exactly is going on there?
Yeah. So first of all, been there, done that numerous times and been surprised by it. And even more surprised that I was surprised by it.
Right.
It's all a function of, electrical physics. So again, it's the same argument. So the same thing we're talking about, things charge faster with higher wattage, is true with your input. So to go on your point there, so I was charging one of my anchor packs and can't remember what kind of charger I was using. I was in the kitchen and I think it was one of these little 5-watt chargers. It was either that or it was one of those multi-station USB hub type things.
Yeah. Plugged
it in, hit the little circle, and I had, 2 dots out of, what does it have? Maybe 8 or 10 dots, little LEDs telling you how full it is. It's like, okay, fine. I don't really need this right now. I'll just leave it on. Come back the next day and it hasn't charged at all. I'm like, what's going on here? So I thought the outlet was messed up and I was like, oh, wait a second. So then I plug in I think I actually ended up using the iPad charger that I had laying around and is much quicker. It's a matter of force. You've got to have a higher force to be able to push those electrons in and keep them in. We got something weak like a little 5-watt iPhone charger. It's just not enough to push it in. It would take forever. In fact, it may not even, there may be a threshold. I don't know specifically, because I'm not super well versed in the internals of the anchor packs, but there may be some threshold where if you're not even getting this wattage, you'll never fill it up. You need a minimum amount at least to get the thing to charge up. But essentially, if you're looking to charge the thing quicker, you need to bring a larger wall plug. That's going to set you straight.
So I think that's the takeaway here from this section around the battery banks is when folks are considering, which battery bank to buy, they also need to factor in which wall plug they're going to get and make that part of the budget, part of their weight. Because if you are opting in for a larger battery bank for whatever reason, you've got extended amount of time away from civilization, or maybe you're someone that is vlogging or taking photos, photography, maybe you just have more electronic needs, you need a larger pack. You're going to have to invest in some type of wall plug that can keep up with it for your maybe one night, or half a day absolutely. In town.
Yeah.
So, and with that in mind, I think Anchor has quite a few options. I know I have a variety of options, and there's, like I said, there's no shortage of different ones on Amazon, but definitely something to consider when it comes to that. Okay, so the next part, let's talk about those batteries is in terms of the elements, right? So you're backpacking for multiple amount of days and you've got these battery banks on you. What's going on with them in different temperatures or different weather? What's the best way to protect them in those conditions? Yeah,
sure. So and again, this parallels with aviation a lot as well. Because we have batteries on our planes, we have to protect them. We're in a lot of heat and a lot of cold ourselves. So two number one enemies, or one, I don't know, you know what I'm trying to say. The two biggest enemies of batteries in their lifetime is extreme cold and extreme heat. So they're both equally bad. They do kind of opposite things, but the result is the same. Your device doesn't work properly, and that's the issue. So we'll start with extreme heat, getting into summertime here pretty soon. So what's going on with extreme heat? Anytime you have a circuit, a printed circuit board, anything like that, or the battery, we'll talk about the circuit elements first. They can only get but so hot. I remember in my senior year, we had a class that was a circuit lab, and just building little, kind of fundamental circuits with a battery and a resistor and like a light or something. And I remember I put it on. I don't remember all the specifics, but anyways, I walked away. I smelled this awful smell. I was like, what is that smell? And I come back and the resistor is just black. It is absolutely charred, and it eventually had just exploded is what happened. Wow. So resistors are actually, what my point is, resistors are limited to wattage. So they can only handle but so much wattage. So let's see if I can do this math in my head real quick. Say you have a 5-volt voltage source, and you're pushing an amp through your circuit. Well, that's 5 watts going into that resistor. And a lot of those little kind of tiny resistors are really only good for a 1/4 watt or 1/8 of a watt. So they're not meant for that. So that's a little bit of that's more of a wattage side of things. But from a physical standpoint, heat, so wattage is energy, and energy is heat. So stuff gets hot. I mean, your charger is going to get hot. Your battery gets hot. Anytime you're transferring energy, heat is kind of a byproduct of that. In fact, you're losing a little bit of energy through heat. But heat can damage circuit elements. I mean, stuff can literally, you've heard people say, hey, it fried. Well, stuff fries. That actually happens. So if your phone especially is out, you leave it. Everybody's done this. They've left their phone in the dashboard of a car and went into a store and came back or something like that. You've got the warning on your iPhone that says, hey, device is overheated. That's a fail safe saying, hey, if you start using this device, the demand you're putting on the device is going to make even more heat. And eventually these all components have a thermal limit and a voltage limit, amp limit, all that sort of stuff. Eventually they're just going to sizzle up, and that's it. You can't fix it. There's nothing you can do about it. So that's on the circuit side. With the batteries, so it actually shortens the lifespan of the battery. So batteries are chemical reactions. So inside, whether it's a lithium ion, lead acid, whatever, batteries make their energy through chemical reactions. So what happens is you get the battery really hot. The rate inside the battery, the chemical reaction increases. So it speeds up. So what's actually happening is your battery is working harder when it doesn't need to. So it's discharging quicker, even though you haven't really asked it to do it.
Wow. Yeah.
It's pushing out more energy because otherwise it's just going to run away. And there are tales of batteries, NiCad, nickel cadmium batteries that they don't, this is more aviation stuff, but a lot of NiCad batteries have been replaced now with lead acid batteries, because when we would recharge our batteries, we have an alternator in a plane just like a car. Sometimes the battery voltage was too low, trying to charge it too fast, got into what they call thermal runaway. The chemical reaction got so fast, it got out of control, and the battery exploded, and obviously bad things happen.
It was a bad day. Yeah.
It's a bad day, especially if you're in the air. It's not not ideal. So batteries can warp, bubble, spark, explode. It's bad news. So that's heat. So equally bad, but in a different way, is cold. So really what's going on in the cold is your battery, it all comes back to the chemistry. It's all about heat transfer and energy transfer. So when you have a lower ambient temperature, let's say we're in the negatives. So the chemical reactions inside the battery are actually starting to slow down, because, heat is just moving particles moving past each other. So you start slowing those particles down. The battery is just going to slowly kind of go into this mode of it just can't keep up. Basically, it's going to produce less and less current than it would at a higher temperature. So eventually you can get to so cold that they can't even deliver enough energy to keep up with what you're trying to do. And maybe all you're trying to do is check your time, check the lock screen. If you're out, especially in the northern part of the trail or wherever the most extreme temperature is for the cold, you could very well see that, you've got plenty of battery voltage, or it looks like your percent's high enough, it just quits, because essentially the battery is too cold to work. So, keeping it in a warm spot, so using your own body heat. So I know it's a popular thing to sleep with it in your sleeping bag. If you're wearing multiple layers, put it inside a pocket. Do whatever you can to keep the heat in it if you need it. And especially if you've had it off for a while, probably a good idea to get it heated up before you even bother turning it on, because it's just gonna run it down. And no matter how much charging you do, it's gonna take a while. And if obviously you can't really charge it if you're out and about unless you've got the battery pack, and it can run into the same problem. Battery packs are just as susceptible to the elements as devices themselves are.
So it's definitely, it sounds obvious, but batteries are consumable things, and they do have a lifespan, and they can be damaged. And so keeping your phone and battery packs out of the sun, if they're on an external pocket or you're leaving them somewhere, is critical for longevity. And then, for the other end of it, with the cold, all of those components, anything that isn't, a battery bank or a phone or whatever that you're sleeping with in your sleeping bag when the temperatures are nearing freezing, I guess, is just smart practice. And I was going to mention this at the beginning of the episode, and I'll probably share some after the interview, but all of this is on a spectrum of technology in the outdoors. So some people will look to this and say, you know what, I'm outside. I don't want my phone. I don't want a camera. I want to take it all in. And that's awesome, right? There's other people that may say, I'm in the outdoors. I want my phone to be able to document what's going on. I still want to be connected to family. We're not here to say which one is better or not. I tend to just come from an idea of safety. When things go wrong in the outdoors, there's probably a connection here to being a pilot. When things go wrong, there have to be multiple things in a row that go wrong, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not just one thing. And so any way you can interrupt some of those things from happening, I think is always a smart way to go about being in the outdoors, especially if you're hiking by yourself or away from civilization. And so carrying a phone or just having a battery source so your phone doesn't die, I think there is an element of safety to that, depending on the type of trip that you're doing. And things can get kind of dicey really quick. If you're somewhere and you get wet, you get cold, something happens to your tent, and then your phone's dead or damaged, that's a lot of variables all at once that could get kind of dicey or quicker than I think people might realize. So
yeah, absolutely. Going back to aviation again, because that's obviously my main draw. One of the kind of catchphrases or whatever axioms of flying is always have an out. Even if you don't think you need it, you always need an out. So maybe you're going on a long trip and you got weather to deal with. Don't ever get yourself in a situation where you can't get out of it. If you think through a list, it's like, all right, if X happens, that's it. I'm toast. It's like, I didn't bring a phone. So if I fall down a cliff and break my leg, that's it. And to your point, I know you carry a Garmin, some sort of Garmin device, right?
Yeah, the InReach Mini.
Right. So, it's you kind of weigh investing versus, it's risk calculation, risk assessment, and what you're willing to risk. But especially when you're hiking by yourself, or if you're just out by yourself in general, it's always good to have an out of some sort, and always prepare for the worst, expect the best. That keeps you the safest.
And even if it's not for you, right? I mean, you may come across someone who needs help, or someone you're with may need help. It's not always kind of self-centered. I would hate to come across someone on the trail who is injured or in need, and I've got no way of contacting anyone. That would be no fun for anyone involved in that. So I say all that just to add a little bit of a layer of, wherever folks fall on the technology in the outdoors, belief, that is okay. We're not here to convince anyone about what you shouldn't take in the outdoors. I don't want to jump away from the battery packs just yet. The last thing, though, is, we've talked about temperature. What about moisture? What advice would you have to people that, especially long distance backpacking, they're going to run into all kinds of weather. In the AT, it rains every day, it feels like. So in terms of keeping those things dry, and then in the event that they get wet, is that the end of it? Is there any hope? Yeah,
moisture's tricky. Fortunately, if you kind of keep up with newer phones, more and more phones are coming out nowadays with water, I won't say proofing, it's resistance. I think Samsung has always kind of been on the front edge of being quote unquote waterproof or water resistant. Having a good case, obviously, for both physical damage and just to keep the water off of it is, I would say, just a must have. I wouldn't be walking or doing a through hike with a naked phone. Definitely wouldn't want to have something that's just open with ports exposed and whatnot. So obviously there's a bunch of different brands. Everyone has their favorites, but something that is watertight or tested to be waterproof. And, when you buy cases like that, they come with instructions to actually test it. I won't pretend that I've followed those instructions. I just kind of put it on, assume it works. But there are instructions that say, hey, put this case in the water and see if it leaks. And if it doesn't, great. You've got what we told you. Put it on your phone, you get a little bit of security there. But so the way water messes with electronics is water is highly conductive. So conductive means electrons can easily pass through water. So let's say you've got a circuit with a few elements on it, and you do not want circuit element A to have anything to do with circuit element B. Like, those are completely different. They're doing different jobs. Like, if you connect those two wires, catastrophe. Well, what happens with water getting into the system is water doesn't care about how you designed your circuit board. Water cares about, gravity and just wherever it lands. Mm-hmm. So what ends up happening is you get a bridge maybe between really anywhere in the circuit. Water is going to cause a short circuit somewhere. So things are now connected that should not be connected. And kind of to my point earlier where I fried a resistor, that's what's going on is you're putting charge through a place that is not supposed to be.
I've always heard that term, short circuit. And now that you're saying it, I'm picturing it, and that actually is very helpful. That's just, that makes total sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you got short circuit and open circuit. So open circuit's not connected. Short circuit's basically just one loop, one connection. So yeah, water highly conductive, especially ocean water. Salt water is highly conductive. You get that in your phone. I won't pretend I'm an expert on how to fix it, but there's a few kind of homemade remedies. First recommendation was don't turn it on. If your phone's already off, please do not turn it on without
leave it off.
Very sure that the water is out of it. If your phone is, on, as in on standby, as in the screen's dark, but you could click a button, it would turn on. Don't do that either. You're going to stand your best chance of saving the device if you don't activate anything that's not already active. So there's circuitry going all the time. Your cell radio inside is always looking for a signal, your Wi-Fi radio, Bluetooth, whatever you got. Some of that stuff's already going. So sometimes the damage can be done, unfortunately. But what you can do is, I think rice is the common thing. The idea being you put it in a bag of rice and
uncooked.
Uncooked. Yeah, there you go. And right. Don't use your trail food unless you have to. The rice will soak up water, ideally, that's in the system. That I don't know how long you normally need to wait. I mean, just a quick Google search would tell you what to do better than I can. But that's a way to get the water out. But really, my recommendation is if it's wet or you dropped it in the water, time is what you need, because, like I said, it doesn't necessarily damage the part if it's off. You need it to dry, and then all is well. Circuits aren't allergic to water. It just connects things that shouldn't be connected.
Well, the best way to get and that's a good reminder, because sometimes I do wonder, should I shut it down, leave it, whatever. That is a good reminder. I think it's also important to try to get ahead of it. So if it does mean a waterproof phone case or water resistant phone case and some type of roll top dry bag for your battery banks and cables and things is always smart. If you're planning on using it long term, and it always comes back to, if you're out there on a week-long trip and the first day you fry your 20,000 milliamp battery bank, you're just carrying this brick for the whole trip,
just leave it.
Right.
Right. Don't leave it don't litter, but yeah, exactly.
Right. It's just weighing you down. What could go wrong?
Yeah. No, sure. That'll really get you a lot of heat.
Yeah. It's a good reminder, because I think this is my own philosophy that I'm going to interject here, but we go through all this planning and effort to do these hiking trips. And it's like, if you haven't at least done the groundwork to ensure that you're not ruining devices or things are not working properly, it's like, what was all that other planning for? Right. And I think electronics are a component of that. People sometimes just kind of glaze over it and they don't realize, what could go wrong. And then they're in a tricky situation with those. Okay. So that is different temperatures, water, all the elements that folks may run into with the battery banks.
Actually, I have one more little thing to add.
Yeah, sure.
Batteries while we're at it. If we're talking about going back to the extreme heat and extreme cold conversation, you made a comment that batteries have a life cycle and that they don't last forever, and they can only really fully charge and discharge but so many times. So if you're going on a long through hike and your phone is maybe of age, or a second hand or something like that, I'm not sure about how you do it on an Android device. I've always just had Apple devices. But if you go into your settings and you go to the battery option, there is a battery health section there. It's actually going to tell you right now what the maximum capacity of your battery in your phone is at the moment. So right now I'm only at 91% maximum capacity. I've had this phone for about a year. So as you charge and charge and charge and charge, and some people are advocates for charging their phone every single night. Some people say I'm going to charge it every other day because I don't. There's all sorts of different theories on should you let it completely discharge, go down to 50%, leave it plugged in all day long, every single day, those sorts of things. If you're going on a long hike, long story short, it will tell you that, hey, your battery's pretty weak. You may want to consider replacing it. And that's a service that you can have done at an electronics shop somewhere. But that'll buy you a little extra time every charge cycle. I mean, if you're going a long ways, you could calculate out if you've put in 10% more of battery capacity, now you don't need your anchor pack or whatever that many more times, and that's all that much less time you need to be charging the anchor pack. So it's just a game of inches. So it's a long trail. So if you're doing a long thing, take inventory of your battery capacity before you leave, because honestly, this is the first time I've looked at mine in a little while, and that's actually a little surprising I'm down that low. But it all comes down to how often you charge it and how long it's plugged in. There's a feature on mine here that actually says optimize battery charging, which I have toggled on, and it actually learns from your daily charging routine to it kind of delays that last 20%. It helps when it's recharging to help reduce the battery aging. There's some technologies coming out that are trying to push the life of batteries, but they certainly are life limited.
That's a great reminder. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think about that. It kind of goes back to my last point. If you are planning a long section hike or, even a through hike, it may be wise to line up your phone battery replacement or even your phone upgrade around the time you're about to go. I mean, obviously you don't want to do it on the trail, but the month before is part of your preparation to say, this is going to be a good time for me to change my battery or upgrade my phone, because you're right. If your battery can only ever charge to 70% in that battery health metric on iPhones, at least, you're just kind of carrying dead weight, because you're only getting 70%
absolutely.
there. And then, like you said, your battery bank is going to have to do more work. You have to charge it more. And even if you've had a battery bank for a few years, it may be time to look at maybe a different one. You may be, the way the technology advances, you may be able to get one that is similar specs, but is way less weight. And obviously some people, weight matters a lot. Some people, they don't care. But I think it's a good reminder, people spend so much time looking at their tents or water filters, but it may also be the right time to think about upgrading some of these devices.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we mentioned cell phones a little bit. I think it would be great. Obviously, you're familiar with GutHook and how that works. And so a lot of hikers use GutHook on a variety of trails, both in airplane mode and with service. And it's great. And then it works without service. Could you maybe just do a kind of same overview with different cell phone services, right? 5G, 4G, all the
actually I had to
metrics.
do kind of in preparation for this. I did a little research on it because it is a little confusing. We've heard these terms for, years. 4G, 5G, everything's the latest and greatest. So we'll start kind of from the basics. What is G? Literally all that means is generation. So all this 5G talk, we're now in the 5th generation of cellular technology. So I was looking at an article, actually Verizon, I think someone had published it. 1G, it's the first generation. That was back in the 1980s. So I'm just reading straight off of Verizon article here. So the top speed of data transmission back on a 1G network was about 2.4 kilobits per second. That's atrocious. So we'll keep walking up the chain. So now we get 2G that came around 1991. 2G now has allowed you to do SMS and MMS. So we can talk about what those two things are. So SMS is short messaging system. So you may see, especially I keep going back to iPhone users, I just know it. If you're an iMessage person, it's blue message, right? But if you're using you have really low service or really, really spotty signal, you may only be able to send out a green message, which isn't SMS. There's an option to send as SMS.
Right.
And that's just a 160 character limited text message. That's why if you send a really long thing, you're going to get a little response back where it breaks it up into 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3. You'll see this kind of paragraph form of it when they get sent to the other person.
And that's an SMS message.
That's an SMS message.
iPhone users, green bubbles.
Correct.
Okay.
That's some green bubble stuff. So what's the difference between an SMS and an MMS? So an MMS is a multimedia messaging system. So it's exactly what it sounds like. You can send different types of media. So now you're able to send pictures, videos, that sort of thing. So you can't do that with an SMS. So that was all introduced back in 2G networks. And those speeds were around 50 kilobits per second. So we're walking it up a little bit at a time. 3G is kind of, at least like I'm 26. I know you're just a little bit older than I am. 3G was kind of when we got into cell phones back in middle and high school. 3G was kind of the latest and greatest. That actually didn't come out until 1998. And this article actually says this is what we call a slow network now. But back then, that was the main thing. You could do 2 megabits per second on a stationary device, or if you're, as this says here, if you're in a car, you could do 384 kilobits per second. So that was big data transmission back then.
Right.
So spitting out a lot of numbers here, but a lot of people speak gigabytes. So what's a gigabyte? Gigabytes 1,000, really 1,024 bytes. What's a byte? Well, a byte is 8 bits. And a bit is kind of, if you think about atoms and molecules, bits are like the atom. It's the smallest unit. So back at 1G, you could used to only do 2.4 thousand, so 2,400 bits per second. Nowadays, so I just talked about 3G. So what we're in right now is kind of a transition between 4G and 5G. So 4G, especially for Verizon users and some others, 4G LTE. So LTE, that's kind of that's the current standard. It's released in the late 2000s. It's 500 times faster than 3G.
Wow.
So no more kilobits per second. We're now talking hundreds of megabits per second. So basically what's happening is as the technology pushes along, if you think of a wave, the frequency of the wave, so how fast the waves are coming at you, that's what's increasing here. So with 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, now 5G, the band of transmission, I'm not trying to get too technical here, but basically the signal is becoming so much, the frequency is so much higher, you can get a lot more data transmission. In fact, if you guys have a dual band Wi-Fi at your house, say you've got a lot of times people have Wi-Fi's, this might be a nice little factoid for people who have no idea what this is. You have a 2.4 gigahertz and a 5 gigahertz. They're both your Wi-Fi, and you're like, why is there two of them?
Yeah.
So the 2.4 gigahertz can actually get further. So if maybe your router's upstairs and you want internet in the garage or the basement, maybe you can't get the 5 gigahertz, but you can get the 2.4 gigahertz, fine. The difference is with the higher frequency, which 5 is a little bit more than twice of 2.4, your speeds are much faster. So the range is reduced, but the speed increases.
Gotcha.
So as these generations are going up, the range that doesn't necessarily hold up when it comes to cell signals. But with Wi-Fi, that's what's kind of going on. Is the further you get from 5 gigahertz, further away from it, your signal dies off a lot quicker. But now we're getting into 5G, and 5G is honestly, it's so new. I don't have a whole bunch of stats on that yet, but it's just the latest and greatest. I actually was looking at another article that was talking about going back to batteries with iPhones. So this guy did a benchmark with an iPhone 12, which is a 5G phone, and an iPhone 11, which is a 4G phone. The 12 had a battery size of 2,800 pretty much milliamp hours, and the iPhone 11 was 3,100 milliamp hours, just a little bit more. Okay. What he did, let me see if I can find exactly what he said he did. So this was his benchmark test. So he said he wrote a little thing that surfs the web continuously at the same screen brightness. It would launch a new site every 30 seconds until the battery drained. Wow. That's what he did, just over and over again. And he just measured the time, how long did the battery last. So for the 5G iPhone 12, it lasted a little under 8.5 hours. And the iPhone 11 on the 4G was 11 hours.
How about
with
that?
16 minutes. So
wow.
5G, the higher your signal, it's just there's a lot more data transmission, a lot more work being done by your processors. It's just more energy density. So your speed comes at a cost, and no free lunch. So you get something faster, you're going to be paying for it somewhere. So maybe you're out on the trail and you've got great 4G LTE because you're at the middle of a city where there's tons of stuff, tons of signal, there's no issue. Or maybe you're out in the middle of absolutely nowhere and you don't have any signal. Or maybe you get a 1X. So what the heck is a 1X? So a lot of people see 1Xs and kind of wonder what that is. So 1X is, at least in Verizon, I can't speak for others because I've just only had Verizon, but it's kind of any service less than 3G.
Okay.
If you're not getting 3G or better, because 3G is also an icon you can get. LTE is an icon you can get up at the top where it says your thing, or you might see roaming or something like that. So with 1X, you can really only likely send an SMS text, which I've been there, done that. I mean, even on the section that I hiked with you in August last year, where were we? We were somewhere around Daleville, Roanoke area.
Yeah.
We had just done the Dragon's Tooth, I think, or on the way to Dragon's Tooth, somewhere around in there. I remember distinctly, wherever we camped that night before, I could only get 1X. I could only send out an SMS text, which again, it's a 160 character limit. I'm not going to be probably not going to get any phone calls. You can give it a shot. But so how this all kind of factors into battery discussion, I know there's a long tangent dissertation there, but your phone is kind of designed to always be looking for signal. So if you don't have any signal, your battery will actually step up its game a little bit, like, oh, maybe it's my fault. maybe I'm not.
Oh, wow.
Maybe I'm not looking as well as I should. So it'll actually give you a little bit more juice into its radios, internal radios, to pick up your signal. And as you can guess, that's going to kill your battery. So if you know you're going to be somewhere where there is no service, and I think you mentioned you use the coverage app that helps you know where you can get some service. So if you know you're in a dead zone, you have no idea that, or you have no chance of getting service, put it in airplane mode or turn it off, because you're draining more battery than you would if you're on service and not doing anything. Because that, if you ever notice, your phone actually gets really hot when it's looking for service and can't find it. It's not a happy state for it to be in. 3G is just a little bit better than the 1X. Again, we talked about 3G. That used to be the gold standard back when, 10 years ago, but stuff moves fast. So you could still accomplish sending messages, and you can certainly surf the web. You feel like you probably can't, but that's just because we're so accustomed to 4G. So those are kind of the different. Hopefully that demystifies a little bit what all the symbols mean, but
that's helpful. And, for some people, that may be the only time they see different signals is when they're on the trail
absolutely.
or in the backcountry.
I haven't seen some of those before. 1X is one I had not seen in a very long time.
Yeah, and I've always heard different things. So it's a good reminder that, yes, putting your phone in airplane mode does, in fact, prevent it from using that kind of extra just energy to look for service. And, if you're going to be on a bald or the top of a mountain or somewhere that may have a better chance of having service, you could turn off airplane mode and go from there. You mentioned the coverage app. I'll put that in the show notes as well, but it just has all the major carriers mapped, overlaid with like Google Maps, and you can even see the trail on it. So sometimes if you're planning a trip or looking ahead, that's a good tool to use as well. So these are all great topics that I wanted to cover. The last one I saved for the end because I know that it can sometimes be a bit polarizing or funny to people. Of course, people want to know about solar. We got to talk about solar. So where do we even begin, right?
Yeah, solar is, I'll give a little bit of background here. So back when I was in school, my senior year of college in my electrical engineering program, I was working in a lab doing research with LEDs, which I told you earlier. LEDs and solar cells are basically the same structure, kind of in reverse. So an LED, you give it electricity and it makes light, or you give it energy and it makes light. A solar cell is basically the same structure, the same principles, but you're giving it light and it gives you energy. So that was, 2017. I lose track of time. That was 4 years ago. And back then, the best solar, we had one of our other kind of partner groups that's all they did was solar cells. All I did was LEDs. They did solar cells, and 20%, 22% efficiency. That was it. If you could get 22% efficiency out of something you made in the lab, man, you were really doing something.
Wow.
And then I looked up today, because I honestly haven't just paid much attention to it. Haven't really gotten a whole lot further than that. In fact, one of these articles I see dated February 5th of 2021, most efficient solar panels on the market today have efficiency ratings as high as 22.8%.
Wow.
So what does that mean practically? You could probably pick up what we're putting down here is solar cells aren't light. They're not super practical. They're kind of big. They're these rectangular things. They have to have a certain structure. The way they're made, it's not something you could just kind of put in any shape or put in any little device. It's got to be this rectangular kind of structure of some sort, no matter how big or small it is. If you want a solar cell that is going to do you any good, you may as well just wear a hat with a giant solar panel just on top of it, because that's the energy that you need. It's just going to be very difficult to obtain through solar with today's technology. And that's also just my opinion. I don't necessarily have a grudge against solar power. I wish it was more efficient than it was, but it's just got some physical limitations.
Yeah. The concept is great. And, this is one of those things that I see people all the time wasting money on, and I feel so bad. And I always want to get ahead of it and say, don't spend a lot of money on it. And I've seen that a lot of hiker boxes, especially early on in the trail, will have some of those little fold up solar panels just in them that people have left. And, once again, Amazon will love to sell you a fold-up solar panel, and they'll even go in and they'll Photoshop the panel onto the back of someone's backpack, and it looks like it's getting all this sun, and you're having infinite power. But we go back to our beginning conversation, how much it takes to charge those battery banks.
Oh, man.
You're just not going to get it from the sun. Even if you're in the desert on the Pacific Crest Trail for a whole day, it's still going to be tough.
Yeah, just think about it. So we were talking earlier in the show about using the little square or cubic iPhone chargers, 5 watt, into a 120 volt outlet at your house is not going to charge your anchor pack at all, hardly anyway. So it's just solar is and you're out in the wilderness and you're certainly not getting 5 watts out of a solar panel is what I'm trying to say. The wattage you're getting is just so small. What I was mentioning to you earlier, and I think people would probably agree, a lot of watches have solar technology on them. It's a great supplement. I mean, like we said, it's free energy. It's out there. If you can harvest it and use it, don't say, well, I'm not going to buy a solar watch because they said solar is bad. No, of course not. It's a supplement, but you cannot. The money you could spend on a solar panel and the weight, just all the different factors going into solar, you could solve all your problems with a battery pack. I mean, with that same amount of energy. It's just not. It's kind of cool. It's niche. It seems kind of like it would be a smart thing to do, but you'd probably be better to set up a water wheel and camp near a stream, and just harvest that overnight. There's probably
they actually make one of those.
I'm sure they do. That's a great locomotive. Yeah, that's free energy as well. But yeah, solar's a great concept. It's just not practical in a small application for that much energy density. Now, if you put it on top of your house, sure, yeah, you're getting stuff out of that, but you're not carrying a, 100-pound solar panel on your back to get what your little anchor pack could push out in, an ounce. It's just, the energy density is just not quite there.
Yeah, well, if folks only take anything from this, I hope we see less people wasting money on solar technology. I mean, I hope it gets better. I hope one day we can have everything charged, and I think it's great because, you don't have to worry about being near an outlet or anything. You mentioned the solar watches. I have a Garmin watch that has the solar technology in it. And you're right. It's great as a supplement, giving you an extra day or an extra couple hours if you need it. But it's just not quite there.
No, it's not. There's just a lot of physical hurdles with that technology that at the time, like I said, this was 4 years ago, it was tough to crack. And obviously that hasn't changed. So it's kind of like processors and things with computers. They keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. At some point, you can only get so small before you're smaller than the smallest thing that exists, and we're about there. I forget, there was some somebody's law or something like that. It was basically the size of technology decreases this amount every so many years, and it's followed that for decades until kind of now we're kind of getting to the limit. And I think solar's kind of in that realm. I don't know. I don't want, like I said, I don't want to claim I'm any sort of expert about solar energy, but I just know it's very limited, and even at best, it just doesn't crank out as much, and it's not a good application for being on foot as a sole power source.
And then you throw in the weather if it's cloudy, and then you throw in the coverage and on the AT.
Or dark. It's not doing anything for you while you're asleep.
Yeah, you're just carrying it. And on the AT in the spring and summer, you're kind of in that green tunnel all day. So your opportunity to even get sunlight is very, very
absolutely
slim. Well, anyway, I'm glad we covered solar.
Sure.
And hopefully educated some folks on that. I know some of it's kind of obvious. I really appreciate your time today,
sure,
Will. I think this was really helpful. And if folks have any specific questions, my email is always in the show notes. Please send them our way. I can get it to Will, and he can answer some of those questions if this
be glad to.
Jogs something.
I know we've just kind of been talking off the cuff here, and be glad to clarify some things if I'm able, or if I can't know it, I'm certainly find somebody else who does. So be glad to help.
Right on. Well, I think it's a great kind of first supplemental subject that we've been getting a lot of questions for. All right. Well, thanks so much, Will, and we'll talk soon.
Of course. All right. See you later. Thanks, guys.
Well, I really enjoyed that conversation with Will. Our conversation went a little longer than I had anticipated, but I really enjoyed it. And some of it was new to me and very interesting, and some parts of it were a reminder. But I think overall, it was a good first shot at a subject matter discussion for backpacking. I hope you were able to learn something new from it, or get a new perspective on what technology and electronics looks like for you hiking. I know that I mentioned this in the interview, but I did want to reiterate that, of course, everyone has different preferences, and the way that electronics play into their hike may be very different. You may be someone who doesn't want to be connected and not have to worry with phone calls or texts. Or you may be someone who enjoys vlogging, podcasting, taking photos when you're out in the backcountry and on the trail. And there's nothing wrong with any of those. And at the very minimum, just having some type of reliable connection for safety reasons is always a good idea. All right, so moving ahead, we'll look for other ways to incorporate some subject matter experts into our discussions, and it could be a wide variety of topics. If you have any you're interested in, please let me know, and we can try to make it work. That's all from me today. I'm going to pass it over to Steve now, who's going to close out the remainder of the show. Thanks again for listening, and here's Steve.
Thanks a lot, Ryan, and thanks for another great show. I learned so much, to my embarrassment, and thought that Will made the subject really accessible. Nice one. So, Katie, and this week we decided not to record, and as I know that many of you have been wishing her well recently, I reached out to her to get a brief update, and she texted me this morning. Actually, I think I'm going to read what she wrote. I'm sure she won't mind. She said, "Hi Steve, I have a follow-up appointment next Thursday. If all goes well, I hope to be back on trail the following Monday or Tuesday, May the 17th or 18th. I'm doing strengthening exercises daily for muscles supporting the knee, as well as yoga every day. I've started doing some light walking twice a day, and I'm able to do so without pain. I liked your idea about continuing north rather than jumping to Katahdin and heading south. So for now, my plan is to get back on at Allen Gap and hike until about the third week of June. Then I'll jump up to Harpers Ferry. Virginia's my home state, so if I need to come back and fill that part in, it'll be no problem for me." And then she sent this quick follow-up. "Keeping the focus on strengthening the knees and trying to stay fit gives me a focus so that I don't get frustrated. I'm so ready to be back on trail." I'm sure you are, Katie. So she's headed back next week, the week after trail days. I'm so pleased that she's keeping the faith and isn't letting being at home preventing her from coming back. I hope that the following week we're back hearing from her. And on the subject of trail days, I've taken a booth in the author section there, so if you're going to be there, make sure you pop in and have a chat. As you know, I took this sabbatical from the show to concentrate on writing for a while, and the first part's complete as I've built my author website. Check it out at steveadamsauthor.com. I've rebranded my 3 books, all with new covers designed by a previous guest on the show, Jesse Crawford. I think they look great. The other bit of news from my books is that the free ebook, Hiking the Appalachian Trail is Easy, is now available in print as well as an ebook. The ebook's free, but I have to charge for the paperback, and all 3 will be available at Trail Days. If you want to buy any books and you're hiking, I can take the order at Trail Days, then ship them to any address you'd like me to. Anyway, I hope to meet up with some of you next weekend. Finally today, our donations still make me smile with gratitude every week. This week, monthly donors Ann Dobson, Mike DiCello, Terry Hackler, Jenny Grunke, Lisa Rana, Brian Helton Jr., and Erskine Bass have maintained their support, while Deborah Harvey also made a donation, commenting, "I enjoy the Mighty Blue podcasts. Thank you." No, thank you, all of you. So that's it for this week. I hope that you got as much as I did from Ryan and Will today, and as I say, I hope to get the chance to hang out with some of you in Damascus next week. Ryan, we'll see you next week.